Neves Duran was a hero to Joaquin, but he certainly wouldn't appear in any of the history books at Quincy. Perla Cerda wouldn't have found anyone like her friend Rosalba in school books either. She might have found her in the newspaper, but there she would have been immediately labeled illegal, undocumented, criminal. But Perla saw her differently. There, in a little town, Zacatecas, Mexico, lived Rosalba Ramirez, who had just had her honeymoon. After their honeymoon, her husband went to Chicago and sent for her after he had settled in. It took Rosalba more than a month to get to her husband. The first 2 weeks she spent the night with some friends about 1 mile away from the Rio Grande. Then one afternoon on a hot November day, a man with a mustache, tall and dark, came asking for her. At first she didn't realize that the boat she and her 3 nieces were crossing in had a hole, so they had to put their fingers in the hole so the boat wouldn't sink. They stopped and walked for hours. She wasn't tired. Then they saw the migra, and the man told Rosalba not to say a word. The migra asked the man where they were going, and the man immediately answered that they were going to buy clothes for the girls for winter. They walked a few steps to make sure the migra didn't see them anymore, and then they ran until they spotted a little abandoned store. A van came and picked them up and drove to the bus station. They arrived in Chicago at night on New Year's Day. After they had arrived, she called her husband to go pick her up, but no one answered, so she called her sister. Rosalba had been living in America for 10 months now, but she's still afraid to go anywhere because she's afraid of the migra in case they might catch her. She's been trying to convince her husband to go back to Mexico. Her life has been miserable living in an attic. Then there was Elizabeth. Some people, I suppose, develop into poets, but others just seem to be born with a gift. Either that or in their early years they somehow absorb a sort of lyrical grace that passes the rest of us by. Elizabeth was one of those people. She carried a ragged spiral notebook with her wherever she went and jotted down lines that she would later turn into poems or short stories. By standard definitions, meaning grades, she was not a very good student. She pulled C's and D's in most of her classes and her spelling was highly creative, but she didn't seem to mind. For Elizabeth, words and ideas were meant to be shared, not graded. Her account of her first trip to Mexico was typical of her economical but eloquent style. The airport, 5 o'clock. We were standing in line, ready to board the plane. Finally, we were on the plane. All of a sudden, "Mommy!" screams my brother. "Vamos con Mommy!" "You're too noisy, Abraham." "Shh," says my father. "Lunch." "Shh, Papi, I'm hungry." "Go to sleep. It's too early to eat." Mexico! We finally get there. Grandpa, Grandma, and Tia Monchis. Mexico, my real home. I'd imagined it different, but anyways, I'm still glad to be here. Grandma's house. I'm sitting out front. People are dressed different, look different, talk different too. Not only looking at me, but pointing and talking about me. Finally, a girl comes up to me and says, "¿Qué haces tú aquí? ¿Tú no eres de aquí? Vete para atrás donde vendiste?" But to her surprise, I say, "Yo soy más micocana que ti." I wasn't, but she doesn't know. She leaves, never comes back. I realize that even though I was born in Mexico, I was raised here in Chicago. I'm a Mexican raised here in a different country. I'm not a brazer like they say, not a Chicana either. But they consider me Mexican-American. While the intimacy of the narratives brought a more personal dimension to our work, persuasive compositions gave the kids a chance to lay out some of the opinions they had formed or sharpened during the 2-month span of our study. Gabriel, in arguing against accepting a strictly American identity, revealed that while his grasp of the big picture was not yet firm, he was at least beginning to see one. First of all, I would like to say that many people have different ways of showing our culture. We also have different ways of showing our background. Just because I'm partly American inside, I don't think I'm American, even though I was born one. First, I don't get treated well by teachers who are prejudiced. Many teachers get mad because I talk Spanish in the room. Second, I don't get treated like an American. Third, we Mexicans can't get things like good lawyers that have won many trials, that are good and tough lawyers, because the lawyers might think, "Oh, that stinking Mexican knows he's guilty, so why waste my time?" Perhaps my strongest reason is that each president doesn't do anything for the poor Mexican-American people. The president also gives more money to the rich and less to the Mexicans. So if you're an American Mexican, it doesn't mean that you're fully American. Then keep thinking that way and don't let anyone stop you from thinking that way. So be proud that you're Mexican. I am. Other kids considered perhaps for the first time how gradually embracing an American identity might lead them to deny another part of themselves. As Edmundo commented in a class discussion, it's sort of like you're walking down the street and you're with your friend, the United States, and then Mexico comes walking by across the street and says, "Hey, what's up?" And you ignore Mexico, pretend you didn't see him. Then when you're alone, you see Mexico walking by and you say, "Hey, Mexico, what's up?" It's like you're embarrassed to say hi to Mexico when you're around your friend, the United States. But before long, if you don't say hi to Mexico, he's going to leave you alone. He's just going to leave you. Our entire language arts curriculum that year developed out of the Mexican American identity theme. It spiraled outward, growing into a year-long examination of human differences. We spent the second quarter looking at racism and its many manifestations, the third quarter exploring women's roles in society and gender issues, and the final 10 weeks on a study of other cultures and countries. The kids wrote a lot. They also made videos, acted out plays, and did a variety of oral presentations and group projects. Creating the course from scratch was an exhausting process, however, and by late April, both Bob and I were running low on energy and ideas. We sponsored an international festival in mid-May, which reduced several of the cultures we had studied to a plate of food and a costume, and from there pretty much limped to the finish line. Still, it was a different kind of language arts class than any of us had experienced before. Perla, the student who had written off her friend Rosalba's month-long journey to reach her husband in Chicago, described our course this way to her freshman English teacher in an assignment the next year. Last year in my English class, I learned and experienced new activities. The teachers tried to make it fun, interesting, and exciting for us to learn. We didn't really use any books the entire year. Instead, we used video cameras, stories, and the knowledge of other people. Also, the teachers came up with ideas or themes we would study that theme for at least a few weeks. By the end of the year, we had discussed several subjects such as Mexicans, the role of women in our society, racism, cultures from different parts of the world, the family, sexual intercourse between teenagers, etc. For each of these themes, we would write an essay and do something about it on camera. Mostly we learned to communicate and know more about people from our society. We also learned that no matter from what country, color, or size a person may be, that we should have respect for every person because nothing is going to change the fact that a person is and always will remain a human being. One of our broad goals for the year had been to challenge our students to face some of their biases, to rethink some of their preconceived notions about themselves and others. A big part of accomplishing this, we believed, was overcoming ignorance. And it didn't take long for me to realize that I was one of the most ignorant of all. I had learned a great deal about my students on an individual basis during my first year at Quincy, and the Mango Girls experience had shown me how powerful it could be to connect with the kids' culture. But to say I respected them, which I often did, was a somewhat empty phrase. To begin to have a true respect for my kids, I had to get to know them not only as individuals, but also as people in a particular context. Children of Mexican immigrants living in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago within an increasingly xenophobic larger society in the 1990s. I also had to commit myself to learning more about the historical, political, and economic developments, both in Mexico and in the U.S., that had brought them to where they were, and the current issues that continue to affect them. I couldn't teach kids to honor and respect their rich legacy as Mexicans and as working people, if I only did so in vague terms myself. For me, the 10-week study of Mexican American culture and history was an important first glimpse into a community I was just then coming to know. The kids educated and enlightened me. The stories they told, while often quite personal, allowed me to see more clearly the larger picture, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped their lives and those of their families. They also forced me to take a fresh look at how I fit into that bigger picture, to step back and look at my own hands. It was a reawakening for me, really, but it was only a beginning. I knew I had a lot yet to learn about the kids who called me their teacher.